What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to an all-new Let's Play Hearts of Iron 4. We are about to dive into a brand new campaign starting on the 1st of January 1936, Gathering the Storm. Now, of course, on this channel we have played as the Soviet Union, we have played as Japan, Italy, the German Reich, and the United States, but one thing that we have never really done is a world conquest. And of course, in order to do that, you want to play a powerful country like the US, the German Reich, or the Soviet Union. And the reason why are most of these countries are wild cards. They do start off rather slow, and sure, they have different deviations with their attributes and different abilities, but basically they have the opportunity to really have a roaring economy, and with a very strong backbone for an economy, you can obviously do a lot of additional production of new equipment and new buildings as well. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting as the Soviet Union. I don't know why I said German Reich, but we are going to be playing as the Soviet Union led by Joseph Stalin himself. And of course, because we are playing as the USSR, they are a communist ideology. So essentially it is a totalitarian regime. It is a one-party system, so there are never elections. And yeah, other than that, we have a variety of different attributes that make our country a little bit of a different flavor compared to obviously something, you know, German Reich and Italy are both fascist, but obviously we are communists. So basically, they give you a little bit of flavor. So we have the Trotskyite plight, minus 20%. National unity, so it kind of means that our country isn't necessarily as healthy as it could be. I'll explain what that means later if you're new to Hearts of Iron 4. And we also have the Home of the Revolution, giving us a plus 50% ideology drift defense. This is actually quite good. And of course, we have national ideas, the Great Purge, claims in the Baltic, and war with the UK. So essentially, we can go three different paths to, you know, definitely have quite a fun game. But we are going to be playing a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Historical playthrough. And don't get me wrong, we are going to be deviating from that standard history course, because obviously the USSR did not take over the world. But we're going to have a lot of fun whilst trying to stick to the historical playthrough. So let's go ahead and dive on in. First thing I want to mention is we are going to be starting on the 1st of January 1936, Gathering the Storm. This is at 12 o'clock. We are going to be loading up the exact same date. And the reason why we did this is because when you start off a game, none of your air divisions, none of your actual army divisions or navy divisions are where they need to be, or at least where you want them to be. So I've gone ahead and I have saved the stream about 5 to 10 minutes of actual micromanaging. We are going to be loading on in on regular difficulty, and because of this actual stream, I'm not going to be playing on Iron Man mode. And the reason why is because sometimes, let's say, we go about 15-20 minutes and the game crashes. Well, sadly enough, you know, if you load back up, you know, you've lost all of that. Or let me rephrase. Let's say you've already done an entire episode, but you realize your mic is muted. Oh my goodness, that's horrible. And so because it's Iron Man, you can't really go back. So very first thing I want to mention is looking at, obviously it can seem very daunting for somebody who has never played before, but the very first thing you're going to want to do is click Research at the top left corner of the screen. Now, this is a very standard build, how we're starting off. Obviously, we have a variety of different technology trees that we can unlock and go through, but basically, the two most important starting off are Engineering tree and the Industry tree. And the reason why engineering is so important is if we unlock the very first electronic engineering icon or technology, we can basically get research time reductions on every future research advancement. And I get that 2% doesn't seem like a lot, but ultimately it is going to make a massive, massive difference. So a small investment now is going to yield to very high gains. And also, so that was the engineering tree. Moving into industry, we're going to be unlocking basic machine tools, giving us better production rates, and I'll explain what that means later. And looking at construction, we are going to be having a faster construction speed. So basically, not only are we building factories faster, but these factories are producing more equipment more efficiently, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So obviously this is a very standard build, and as we move down the industry trees, we are going to be getting exponential increases in our industry. So other than that, pretty much where we stand, we've now looked at our research. Let's go ahead and look over at construction. Pretty much one of our biggest priorities right now is the game is just starting off. We have 0% world tension here. So ultimately the world is very, very cold. Nothing is happening at all. So rather than focusing on military expansion, we are going to be focusing on trying to improve our economy for when the world does start getting tense and starting to heat up. We want to be able to have an economy to back a powerful military. So if you're new to Hearts of Iron 4, basically a civilian factory is the main currency within the game. A civilian factory is the backbone of your economy, and what that means is the more civilian factories you have, the faster you can produce everything else. And civilian factories are grouped together in groups of 15, and basically each civilian factory will pump out something called construction cost. And ultimately it is a variety of different, bonuses. So basically, and a variety of different costs. So a civilian factory is actually very expensive compared to something like building a new road to give you better supplies and better infrastructure. So what I also want to say, though, is if we use civilian factories, so we use our currency to make more currency, starting off very early, we're going to lead to some very powerful economies down the road. So obviously what we're going to be doing is we are building 15 civilian factories. So the idea is I'm going to have to try to get one additional line. There's a lot of factories to build, but I'm going to try to get one additional line of construction. One other thing I want to point out is basically the USSR, or the Soviet Union, is one of the most powerful countries in the game starting off, but basically they have a lot of manpower, but they don't really have a lot of equipment. And so we're going to be utilizing that manpower, and I want to try to do some early game invasions of some foreign countries. We're going to talk about that later, but Turkey in particularly. And so the idea is we have a lot of manpower, but our forces don't necessarily have the weapons and equipment they need. So we're going to be using all of our military factories to get that done. And while I'm in this screen, you can ignore everything I'm doing. I'm actually going to scroll down to my fighters, and I'm going to put 4 additional fighters. Obviously, we do not have the factories for them yet, but we will get more military factories in time. But ultimately, what I want to do is, just for the sake of simplicity, I am going to be importing some rubber. I need rubber to build our motorized equipment, which basically transport troops and obviously does a variety of other functions. But more importantly, I'm going to start needing some fighters. And fighters aren't necessarily the most powerful thing in the world, but ultimately they do give some additional modifiers. If we have air superiority over a region, our troops can't necessarily be bombed. And why I say that, fighters don't attack land units, but they secure the skies for your troops. And I get that we're just starting off and this is all going to seem very confusing. So what I'm going to do is, once I get 4 additional military factories, we're going to start pumping out 8 units of rubber. And the reason why I say that is whenever we go into trade, you only trade 8 commodities at a time, assuming that you have convoys. And I actually have very little convoys. So let's go over to rubber, and we might as well, I know historically, I know France is going to get eaten alive by Germany. So let's go ahead and find France. And the reason why I say that, maybe they can put up a little bit more of a fight against France. I don't know, but we might as well try. So this -4 is going to go to +4. Let's actually speed this up to rank 5. And other than that, so the reason why, it's not like they're just going to give us rubber. We are essentially trading 1 civilian factory. As you can see, traded goods. So we literally gave them 1 civilian factory for that rubber. So now our economy is a little bit slower. The amount of factories that we can produce has gone down. So ultimately, if you start trading and getting a bunch of resources, your economy slows down, and ultimately you can lead to a downward spiral. But where we stand now, it's the 1st of January, might as well start actually, no. What we're going to do now is, now that we've looked at our production, our construction, and our research, I now want to click the Soviet Union flag at the top left, and we are going to look at our national focus tree. And essentially, every 70 days, you have the ability to lead your government into a particular phase where you would like to go ahead and make progress. So, of course, we can improve the economy, we can improve our political power, we can improve infrastructure, we can improve our navy, we can do a variety of different benefits, such as, I could say political power as well, because we're going to eventually do the Great Purge tree. But, so where we started, ultimately, is we are going to be unlocking the Stalin Constitution. So, by investing now, we can gain some political power, which is ultimately going to allow us to create more claims to do some conquest. And of course, I want to, with more political power, you can change different laws. And what I want to do first is obviously change up the civilian economy law. And what I want to do is, rather than building toasters and lamps and cars, I would like to go ahead and go all the way down to a war economy. So rather than taking, I believe it is 70% of all of the civilian factories, we are actually going to go ahead... That doesn't make sense. Yes, so rather than taking 70% of all the factories, we are now going to take roughly 85%. But now our military factories don't have a negative 30% construction speed. In fact, they produce 50% faster. So what we're going to be doing is changing to a war economy, but obviously we need political power and we need some world tension to do that. And you'll see in just a moment what I'm planning to do. While the game is ticking on by, in fact I am going to slow this down just a tad. Now, looking over at the map, we obviously have a variety of forces, and it can look very intimidating. So what we're going to do is take this white group that I've already created, and we are going to press this frontline button and move them down to Turkey. Now, if I left click, it will only put us on our Turkish border, which makes exact sense of what I want to do. And just for the sense of lore and just for the sense of having fun and, you know, having a good time, I'm actually going to switch out this really powerful field marshal for a very weak general. And I want to go ahead and hire up, where is he? Zakharov. He is a level 1 general. And I don't know why. I have heard this name before, and I feel like I want to roleplay just a little bit. So this general is hopefully going to be starting off and gaining a bunch of experience in this war against Turkey. Now, he's not as strong, but I feel like if we start him off early, we could definitely have some fun in the wars to come. And now, don't get me wrong, the other field marshal can gain experience and traits too, but this is just for the sake of role-playing and having fun. Now, looking at our main army itself, these are actual infantry troops. The white units that I have just so happened to, have grouped together are mountaineers, and so I have white for, the snow, and, most troops don't like marching through mountains, but mountaineers excel in those. So what we're going to do is take our entire army, go ahead and delete this front line against Poland. We are going to create a front line against Romania, and let's create an offensive line all the way into Romania. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this yet, but the reason why we brought this up is once we have the political power that we're about to accumulate from the Stalin Constitution, sure, we're going to be changing our economy laws, but the most important thing, I want to go ahead and start fabricating a claim early on Turkey and Romania. And the reason why is because the world, nothing is happening in the world. I can go to war with countries, conquest them early enough, and hopefully most of the world's response will be muted. So that's going to be one of my #1 priorities, and I'm hoping everything will work out in our favor. So we are going to need some political power. Now, don't get me wrong, we're gaining political power every month, but we are definitely going to get a massive boost to the Stalin Constitution. Let's actually speed this up. Looking at our main army, we obviously do not have a leader. Most generals, as you can see, general, can lead up to 24 units or 24 divisions in one turn. However, a field marshal can lead up to an unlimited amount. So what I want to do is, for the sake of role-playing, I'm going to go ahead and promote, if I can find him, I'm looking for Gorbachev. Alexander Gorbachev. I am going to go ahead and promote him to a field marshal. He's going to be changing from a skill 3 general down to a skill 2 general, and obviously he doesn't have any traits like Marky and Popov. But as you promote them, they lose all of their traits. So it's good to promote somebody early. And I don't think I really need to do it for Zakharov. I think I'm just going to have one massive field marshal named Alexander Gorbachev, and you will see what he does. And so now Mr. Gorbachev here can lead the conquest with all 72 troops, and everybody else seems to be making their way over. Now, I do want to point out that, like I said, every general can have up to 24 units, and we just so happen, because I loaded a certain start, that I prepared everything, we are actually going ahead and we are producing 11 additional units. Now, obviously, we lack the weapons that I was talking about, and we also lack, other things like artillery. We just don't have the production yet to build those. So what we're going to do is we are producing 11 Mountaineer divisions, as you can see by this Mountaineer template, and we are going to put all of them into Zakharov's army. In fact, we are going to go ahead, looks like Stalin Constitution is done, but we are going to go ahead and build an offensive line. So now we actually have a plan with our Mountaineers. So it looks like we've just completed the Stalin Constitution. So now that we have our political power, we're going to click the province of Turkey, justify a war goal on Trabzon, which just so happens to be the one that is neighboring the Caucasus Mountains, or I guess near Georgia, and obviously the Black Sea. And of course, I'm going to read this in a second. And of course, if we look at Turkey, if I were to declare war on Turkey, now Romania, they're not technically allied, but they are guaranteeing the independence of Turkey. So if I was to declare war on Turkey, I'm going to actually click the default map mode. So if I was to declare war on Turkey, what would happen is Romania would attack me as well. So that's why I put my entire army here. Now, let's go ahead. I know for a fact that I can destroy Turkey and destroy Romania without really any issues, and that's because I have such a high amount of manpower. But I would absolutely like to have some strategic access to move forces from Turkey into Romania. And sadly, Bulgaria is in the way. So we are going to we're going to spend 70 political power, which is actually kind of a lot. And we are going to create another war goal. And as you can see, our war score was about 5%. We boosted it on up to 11. And now we're going to boost it up even higher, which is incredibly dangerous. I don't want a lot of people getting too angry at me. And obviously, because there is peace across the world, and hopefully, if I do this right, it's going to be a bit of a gamble. But I would obviously like to take Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey and really start improving our military might. And in fact, taking over their economy would be useful as well. So now we have the remilitarization of the Rhineland, and if you're familiar with World War II, essentially what happened is after World War I, there was the Treaty of Versailles, and basically the German Reich was forced to give back a bunch of territory that they conquered. They were stripped of a lot of their military, and so right now, if you look at the amount of troops they have, it is absolutely ridiculous. In fact, we're not going to worry about this. This is, I guess, for balance details. But so ultimately, not only were there economic sanctions, but there were demilitarized zones called the Rhineland. And ultimately what that means is France thought they would feel a heck of a lot safer. Though they have this thing called the Maginot Line, there are literally massive, massive forts that I guess we can't see, but I know they're here because it's 10 out of 10 forts. All of these mountainous territories have some really powerful forts, and so what they wanted was a demilitarized zone where Germany was not able to station troops. So France obviously felt a heck of a lot safer because they didn't necessarily, they had maybe a few extra hours or a few extra days to obviously prepare for an invasion if it were to happen. So basically what just happened is Adolf Hitler has come to power, and for a political move, he has decided to go ahead and remilitarize the zone. And for now, what's happening is world tension is starting to, heat up a little bit, and obviously the Soviet Union has caused the most. But so, obviously, the United Kingdom and France are going to be a little bit upset over those actions. And I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much, but so what we're going to do is let the clock speed on by. Oh my goodness. So our Stalin constitution has finally finished on up, so we gained a bunch of political power, and for the sake of simplicity, sure I could improve my economy, sure I could get more political power, but we're going to scroll on over, and we're going to do the Great Purge. And the reason why I say this event is actually not 70 days. This is only one of the, this is a unique event. Like I said, most of these events or focuses are about 70 days. This one just happens to be 210. And so the reason why is basically Joseph Stalin is leading a communistic state. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but this is what I believe happened. After World War I, there was this great revolution, and basically what was happening is we had a variety of like socialists and communists, and they were all battling for power. And so right now, though, don't get me wrong, I could be completely mistaken, the Communist Party is basically in power. There is a one-party system. And then ultimately what happened is they had this man named Trotsky, who has actually been exiled right now, and he believed that there should be a different type, that more power should be given to the peasants and the working class, etc., etc., and the power should not necessarily be consolidated. Now, obviously, the ones who were in power, they have the same feeling, but they were obviously very angry. So what's going to happen if we don't do this Great Purge? A lot of our officers in the military are going to try to overthrow Joseph Stalin. So that even though this revolution was about, I'd like to say, 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of people still feel very strongly that more power should be given to the workers. And so now the idea is I want to go ahead and purge my military. Sure, we're going to be scarred, but if I don't do this early enough, I obviously am going to have a lot of very negative issues. Like I could have a revolution on my hands, and so that's kind of one of the issues. The USSR is going to start off slow, obviously because of this Great Purge and a lot of other things, and so obviously that's what is going to happen. So we also have the fifth column. You can go ahead and read this. Ultimately, Trotsky is basically. Even though he is exiled, he has still a lot of connections, and they are trying to do some sort of revolution. Looks like our very first research technology has been unlocked, electronic mechanical engineering, and might as well continue down this tree to mechanical computing. And the reason why we don't necessarily need a radio just yet, but if we got better mechanical computing, we would have better research time for all industries and all technologies across the board. So let's go ahead and get that started. As you can see, one other thing I do want to point out is Japan wants this entire island of North Sakhalin, and obviously we do not want that to happen. So very soon we might have some small skirmishes with, Manchuria and Russia, and you'll see those. It's not an actual battle, but they're small raids, and I'm hoping that once those happen, because of all of this world tension that I've generated, I don't really want to risk having a war with Japan or starting anything prematurely. So let's go ahead and look at modify government. Now that we have 150 political power, and now that we have over 15% world tension, we can actually bypass all of these early and other mobilizations. Usually I would go from civilian economy to partial mobilization, but let's just take it one step further. It's not that much better, but we are going to be going to a war economy. So rather than using 26 factories to build lamps and toasters and vehicles and cars for consumer purposes, we're now going to be using most of those factories for, weapons and tanks. So now we have gone down to 13 consumer goods factories, and obviously we're still trading for that rubber that we aren't actually producing. Let's actually look back. Because I have surplus rubber, I think I'm actually going to be pressing this button right here, and I'm going to be moving the factories around. And I just want to use all of the rubber I have available. Rubber is the only precious resource that I don't have, and we'll talk more about that later. And so let's go ahead, unpause the game. We are now making a heck of a lot more planes. I should have done that probably, 4 months ago, but, at the most, I'm probably missing out on 20 planes. So once again, as we go through the Great Purge, we're going to have a lot of different... You can read this if you want. I'm not going to bore everybody. But basically, as we move through, we are going to be purging the different... branches of the military. So we're going to be purging the Army, we're going to be purging the Navy, and the Air Force. So right now we have the trial of the anti-Soviet Trotskyite Center. We can either... Oh, excuse me, we haven't even started with the military yet. This is the actual government. So ultimately we could have a civil war. No thank you. That would be absolutely devastating. But I mean, some people like to do role-playing. We could lose 75 political power, or we could lose one of 2 good advisors. And sadly, I would like both of these. One gives us a lot more national unity, which would, be very, very nice. It would give us more health. So obviously, if we get attacked, we don't surrender as easily. And we also have daily communism support, which would be nice as well. I think what I'm going to do is I want daily communism support, so I am going to have this man executed, so that means this man stays alive. So we are removing the 15% national unity. And don't get me wrong, it's not like it's going away. I never had that advisor hired to begin with. He just doesn't exist anymore. And it looks like Joseph Stalin brings revolution to Bulgaria, as we expected. And I'm hoping that very soon... on the 6th of November, that's actually a ways away, but we are finally going to be going ahead and invading Turkey. Looking at our research slots, we just finished up the basic machine tool, so now all of our factories are working a little bit harder, and I am now going to be moving down to concentrated industry. And basically, there's a little bit of a difference. Personally, I always like to get concentrated industry, and so what this means is if you look at a map, all of your, very populous cities are going to be starting to, build up more and more industry, getting more and more factories. And if you build everything more concentrated, you can basically save a lot of time with shipping. So the reason why I bring this up is you get a lot more factory output because things are more efficient. But if you are, if everything is closer together, it means the enemy can bomb you much more efficiently as well. So we are going to take that risk. So rather than having all of our, industry dispersed, like out of the country, I mean, sure, it's going to lead to less factory output, but things will be a heck of a lot safer. As you can see, this factory bomb vulnerability is minus 10%. I mean, it would go all the way down to roughly, minus, 10% to minus 50%, which is pretty broken. But let's go ahead and get the concentrated industry, and the reason why is I want as much factory output as I possibly can, and I'm hoping that the more I produce, the better defenses we'll have. Joseph Stalin questions Turkish sovereignty, so first it was Bulgaria, now it's Turkey. And I really feel like there's going to be a very deadly war here. I'm not sure how many troops we're going to lose, but in fact, we still do need a lot more artillery, and we need a lot more weapons as well. Now we have another, still the same thing, back to Bulgaria, back to Turkey. We still have to wait until the 4th of November, but everybody seems like they are prepped and ready to go. Looking at the rest of the world, the U.S. seems very quiet, obviously, because the U.S. is democratic. They're not going to attack other people that are democratic. But, of course, we are communist, Germany is fascist, and pretty much everybody else is, democratic, at least in Europe. And just a little FYI, most of the democratic countries are generally all friends. And you'll see that most of them will join the Allies. They believe in capitalism rather than like a one-party system or, a government-controlled economy. And so now we've moved on to the generals, which is the army itself. We can basically lead to a civil war. No thank you. Or we can have a variety of advisors removed. And same thing with both. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but the one that I want the most is Alexander Yegorov, who gives more army defense. That's the only thing I care about. So instead of getting him executed, we're going to go down one and have everybody else executed. And you'll see why in a minute. Construction 1 has finally been unlocked. And I guess because we're in the 9th of July, I'm looking around. I think I would absolutely like to go ahead and start working on tactical bombers. It's going to take 186 days, and I am fine by that. You're probably wondering, so we have bombers. You're probably Spanish Civil War. I'll talk about that in a moment. You're probably wondering, why the heck do we want tactical bombers when close air support are a heck of a lot cheaper, 22 versus 37. But basically, these are a lot slower, but they have a lot more range. And because these close air support are very good, you know, and they're a heck of a lot cheaper, I think I'm going to start building some tactical bombers just because Turkey is so large, and obviously over on the eastern side of things, you know, close air support will probably do this, whereas tactical might do something like this much range around this particular airfield. Okay, now also, I get that I am talking for a very long time. We are now part of the Spanish Civil War. So what's happening is we have Nationalist Spain, which is fascist, and we have Republican Spain, which is communist. So it's communism versus fascism, and there is obviously a great divide. And so where we stand now is, sure, we could aid our brethren in Republican Spain, but I think our eyes are glanced elsewhere. So Germany and Italy are going to be sending over some very small amount of troops over to Nationalist Spain, and they're going to trigger things in their direction. Well, I hate to say this, but we are going to end this episode. It has already been over 30 minutes, and I like to go ahead and keep most episodes at 20, but sadly, not much was going on. But thank you again for joining me. Hope you all have an awesome day. I will see you in our next adventure.